Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. You shall make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and out with pitch. And this is how you shall make it. The ark shall be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. Before the first tree was felled, before the first beam was shaped, Noah faced a fundamental question. Where could he build a structure of such enormous size? The site could not be just any piece of land. It had to be large enough to accommodate not only the ark itself, but the entire operation surrounding its construction. It needed to be solid, stable, and capable of supporting the ever-increasing weight of thousands of tons of timber. It also had to be strategically located near forests of gopher wood, because transporting massive logs over great distances would have been nearly impossible. Imagine Noah walking across the landscape, testing different types of ground beneath his feet. He examined the firmness of the soil, studied the slopes, observed the natural drainage, and estimated distances. He had no advanced surveying instruments, but he possessed something just as valuable. Wisdom gained through years of practical experience, and above all, the guidance of God's Spirit. This ground can support what I am about to build. Here is where our journey begins. Once the location had been chosen, the most demanding task began: preparing the land. Massive boulders had to be removed. Deep roots that had penetrated the earth for decades had to be uprooted. Every square foot of ground had to be leveled, compacted, and transformed into a reliable foundation. As Noah worked, the people around him watched. Some laughed openly. Others simply shook their heads in disbelief. Why would anyone build something so enormous in the middle of nowhere? But Noah was not building to impress human eyes. He was building in obedience to God's command. Faced with ridicule or obedience, he chose obedience. With the site finally prepared, another monumental challenge emerged: obtaining enough timber for a structure of that scale. God's instruction was precise: gopher wood. Although scholars continue to debate the exact identity of this tree, most agree that it refers to an exceptionally durable type of wood, one that resists decay and can withstand tremendous stress, possibly cypress or a similar species. But the real challenge was this: no matter how large a single tree might be, it would never be enough. Noah would need hundreds of them. These trees were enormous, heavy, and difficult to cut down with primitive tools. There were no chainsaws or powered saws. Felling a single tree could take several days, strike after strike, carving a deep notch into the trunk while carefully calculating the direction of the fall so the timber would not split when it hit the ground. And when the thunderous crash of the tree finally echoed through the forest, the work had only begun. Now came the most grueling part: transporting that massive log to the construction site. There were no advanced wagons, no machines, and no draft animals powerful enough for such a task. The solution was the same one used by many ancient civilizations around the world: wooden rollers. Smaller logs were placed beneath the larger trunk, like cylinders. Noah, his sons, and perhaps hired workers pulled together in perfect coordination. The trunk moved forward only a few feet at a time. The rollers left behind were carried to the front, and the process began again. Foot by foot, slow, exhausting, dangerous. Yet every step brought them closer to fulfilling God's command. Once enough timber had been gathered, Noah faced the greatest engineering challenge of all. How could individual logs be transformed into one solid structure, strong enough to withstand the destructive forces that lay ahead? Every ship begins with its keel, the massive central beam that runs the full length of the hull and serves as its structural backbone. But no tree on Earth measured 450 feet in length. That meant Noah had to join multiple gigantic beams together, creating one perfectly straight, continuous backbone. These joints could not be weak. They could not be improvised. They had to be every bit as strong as solid timber. The answer lay in masterful joinery. Ancient craftsmen understood how to create remarkably strong wooden connections. They used tongue and groove joints, where one piece fit precisely into another. The ends of the beams were carefully carved and shaped by hand until they locked together like pieces of a puzzle. To secure these joints permanently, hardwood pegs and dowels were driven through perfectly aligned holes, creating connections capable of withstanding tremendous stress. When the keel was finally complete, a monumental beam stretching across the prepared ground, Noah was ready to begin the next critical stage: raising the ribs of the ark. My sons, I do not expect you to understand everything right now. But if God has entrusted me with this mission, it is because He knows we are capable of completing it. The ribs were massive curved beams that rose vertically from both sides of the keel, giving shape to the hull. Each one had to be set at a precise angle, firmly secured to the base and evenly spaced along the entire length of the ark. Imagine the process. Enormous timbers were lifted with thick ropes. Wooden levers served as makeshift cranes. Several men worked together, coordinating their strength to raise each beam into place. Stone plumb bobs were likely used to check alignment. With every rib that was secured, the shape of the ark slowly emerged. It was no longer a collection of scattered timbers lying on the ground. It had become the skeleton of something monumental. With the basic framework standing, Noah entered another critical phase, transforming that wooden skeleton into a watertight vessel. Long, uniform planks were fastened to the ribs, forming the outer walls of the hull. Every plank had to fit tightly against the next, leaving as few gaps as possible. Then came one of God's most specific engineering instructions: cover it inside and out with pitch. Pitch was a resin-like substance obtained from natural deposits, but applying it was no simple task. It first had to be heated until it became liquid, kept at a consistent temperature so it would not harden too soon, and spread quickly before it cooled. Here is the crucial detail. God commanded that the pitch be applied both inside and outside the ark. This was not unnecessary repetition. It was divine engineering. Wood exposed to constant moisture eventually decays. Even slow leaks can destroy an entire structure over time. Every inch of the ark, inside and out, had to be sealed with a thick, even, and durable coating. Noah and his sons likely spent weeks completing this work. They sealed every joint, filled every crack, covered every small opening. They applied one layer after another, waited for it to cure, and then applied more. When they finally finished, the ark was no longer just a wooden structure. It had become a watertight vessel, designed to survive the impossible. The Bible reveals another essential architectural detail. You shall make rooms in the ark. Genesis 6:14. The original Hebrew word suggests compartments, small chambers, and carefully organized sections, not one large, chaotic open space. God also instructed, make it with lower, second, and third decks. Genesis 6:16. That meant constructing 3 complete levels inside the hull, each supported by heavy crossbeams, strong enough to bear tremendous concentrated weight. Noah built partition walls. He created separate spaces for different kinds of animals. He organized them according to their size, behavior, and specific needs. The layout may have looked something like this. The lower deck housed the heaviest animals: elephants, hippopotamuses, large cattle, and other massive creatures. Keeping the greatest weight near the bottom lowered the center of gravity, helping stabilize the ark during violent storms. The middle deck accommodated medium-sized animals, including lions, bears, deer, and larger domesticated animals. The upper deck was likely reserved for birds and smaller creatures, where they benefited from better natural ventilation. God gave another clear instruction: take with you every kind of food that is eaten, and store it up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. Genesis 6:21. Imagine the scale of that assignment. An entire year's supply of food for hundreds of animals. Enough hay for large herbivores. Countless stores of grain, dried fruit, preserved roots, water stored in clay jars and sealed containers. Entire sections of the ark had to be dedicated solely to storage. Everything needed to remain organized for easy access while also being protected from moisture. Then there was another challenge: waste management. Removing the waste produced by hundreds of animals every day for an entire year required an efficient system. The floors may have been built with a slight slope to encourage natural drainage, while controlled openings allowed waste to be removed safely. Passageways had to be wide enough for constant movement as Noah and his family carried out the daily work of cleaning. Among every feature of the ark, none carried greater practical and theological significance than its door. Put the door of the ark in its side. Genesis 6:16. It was a massive side entrance, large enough for elephants and giraffes to pass through. To prevent that opening from weakening the structure, Noah likely reinforced the entire frame with additional beams, diagonal braces, and deep joints anchored into the surrounding ribs. After years of labor, after countless days of exhausting manual work, after enduring constant ridicule from those around him, something extraordinary happened. The animals came. The Bible states it plainly. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 by 2, of all flesh in which there was the breath of life. Genesis 7:15. They were not captured. They were not hunted. They were not dragged inside. They simply came. It was as though an unseen hand was guiding every species. Pair after pair of living creatures began to appear. Lions walked beside gazelles without attacking. Wolves passed among sheep without showing the slightest sign of hunger. Birds settled calmly in orderly groups. Reptiles crawled in the right direction. It was the final confirmation. The work was not merely human. It had been guided by God from beginning to end. When everyone had entered, the animals, the birds, the reptiles, Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives, 8 people in all, the enormous door was shut, and the Lord shut him in. Genesis 7:16. The moment God sealed the door, judgment was about to begin. In the 600th year of Noah's life, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth and the windows of heaven were opened. Genesis 7:11. This was no ordinary rainstorm. The biblical text uses language that conveys overwhelming geological violence. The fountains of the great deep burst forth. The description suggests massive tectonic activity, underwater earthquakes, and powerful geysers erupting through the Earth's crust, sending superheated columns of water high into the atmosphere, where they condensed and fell together with the torrential rain. Imagine the sound. Inside the wooden structure, the noise must have been deafening. The relentless pounding of water against the hull, the continuous roar of thunder, and perhaps most terrifying of all, the sound of the earth itself breaking apart outside. Noah and his family were sealed safely inside. There were no side windows through which they could watch the destruction. There was only faith. Faith in the vessel they had built, and faith in the God who had commanded them to build it. At that moment, the ark faced its first true engineering test. It had been built on solid ground. Now the flood came to it. As the waters continued to rise, hydraulic pressure around the base of the ark increased dramatically. Even well-treated timber had limits. The wood endured its first major structural stress. The family would have heard creaks, groans, the massive Gopher wood beams adjusting to forces they had never experienced before. Then came the most critical moment of all, the transition from land to water. When the upward force of buoyancy finally overcame gravity, the enormous structure, weighing thousands of tons, broke free from the ground. A sudden jolt, a sharp tilt, and for the first time, the ark was afloat. This is where the brilliance of God's design became unmistakable. The ark was never designed to sail. It had no rudder, no sails, no sharply pointed bow to cut through the waves. It was designed for one purpose: to float. Its approximate 6-to-1 length-to-width ratio is still regarded by many naval engineers as an ideal proportion for stability on open water. Had it been wider, violent rolling could have injured the animals. Had it been narrower, it would have been far more vulnerable to capsizing in heavy seas. Instead, its dimensions provided remarkable stability, even amid enormous waves generated by a global catastrophe. The ark remained balanced, rising and falling with the water while rarely tilting enough to endanger those inside. Yet inside the ark, the motion must have been constant. The solid world had disappeared. In the darkness, illuminated only by the flickering light of oil lamps, Noah's family began to grasp the full reality of their isolation. Many people imagine life aboard the ark as a period of quiet waiting. The practical reality was very different. It demanded relentless work. 8 people were responsible for caring for what was, in effect, the world's largest zoo. Their days probably began before enough daylight filtered through the opening in the roof. Every task followed a strict routine. Feeding the animals was no simple matter. Hay had to be carried from storage areas down to the stalls. Grain had to be carefully rationed. Water had to be distributed. Each species required its own specific diet. Sanitation presented another enormous challenge. In an enclosed environment, the accumulation of animal waste could produce dangerous gases and spread disease within days. The drainage system Noah had designed likely helped move waste into collection channels that emptied into the turbulent waters outside. Even so, the system required careful cleaning every single day. The work had to be methodical, consistent, thorough. Meanwhile, the combination of external moisture and the heat generated by hundreds of living creatures caused the wooden structure to expand and contract. Noah and his sons likely made constant inspection rounds with oil lamps, carefully checking the hull for leaks. Even a thin stream of water entering the ark could become a serious threat. Extra pitch kept in reserve had to be applied immediately whenever a crack appeared. The sound of hammers, reinforcing braces, or driving wooden wedges into place was probably common throughout the storm. And the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. Genesis 7:24. After the first 40 days, the rain finally stopped, but the ark did not immediately come to rest. For months it drifted upon a global ocean, with no coastline, no islands, no visible horizon beyond water and sky. During that time, God did not speak to Noah. The biblical record contains no new instruction between the closing of the door and the command to leave the ark. It became a test of perseverance. Then Scripture declares, "But God remembered Noah, and God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided." Genesis 8:1. In the Bible, the phrase "God remembered" does not imply that he had forgotten Noah. Rather, it marks the moment when God was about to act on Noah's behalf. The wind began to blow. The waters slowly receded. Evaporation, natural drainage, and perhaps even the uplift of new ocean basins accelerated the process. Then, on the 17th day of the 7th month, the journey reached its second greatest physical impact, the grounding. And the ark came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat. Genesis 8:4. The word rested sounds gentle. Physics suggests something far more dramatic. A vessel of that size, carried by powerful currents, would have collided with the submerged peak of a mountain range. The hull tilted, then stopped. The constant motion that had defined their lives for months came to an abrupt end. The endless rocking was replaced by the solid stillness of stone. They were no longer drifting, they were stranded, but they were safe. Yet coming to rest did not mean it was time to leave. They remained high in the mountains, still surrounded by floodwaters that had not yet fully withdrawn. More months passed before the tops of other mountains became visible. Once again, Noah's patience was tested. He did not rush to open the door. Instead, he waited until he could determine the condition of the world outside. To do that, Noah turned to nature. He opened the window near the top of the ark and sent out living scouts. First came a raven. A raven could survive amid chaos. Its ability to remain outside suggested that life still existed beyond the ark. But its wandering behavior provided no clear answer about whether the land was truly habitable. Then Noah sent out a dove. The dove was different. It sought clean, dry places to rest. The first time, it returned exhausted. 7 days later, Noah sent it out again. Then came one of the most recognizable scenes in all of human history. The dove returned at evening, and behold, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. Genesis 8:11. That olive leaf was far more than a piece of vegetation. It was biological evidence that life had begun to recover. Photosynthesis had resumed. The waters had receded enough to expose living trees. Creation was breaking through the blanket of death and mud. The resilience of God's creation was beginning to flourish once again. Finally, after more than a year in confinement, the biblical record gives a remarkably precise timeline, nearly 370 days in total. The earth had become dry. Then God spoke again. "Go out from the ark." The door that God had once closed now had to be opened. Imagine the effort required to unseal that massive structure after so much time, perhaps tightened by weather and months of pressure against its frame. When sunlight flooded the dark interior, the experience must have been overwhelming. Eyes that had lived in dim light for more than a year suddenly faced the full brightness of the open world. Yet the departure was not a frantic rush. It was an orderly procession. So Noah went out, and his sons, and his wife, and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, every bird, and everything that moves on the earth went out by their families from the ark. Genesis 8:18-19. They stepped into a world they no longer recognized. The landscape had changed. The climate had changed. The mist that had once watered the earth was gone. Now there would be cycles of rain, seasons, heat, and cold. The land bore the scars of violent erosion left behind by the retreating floodwaters. The ground was covered with layers of sediment. The world had become a silent, empty graveyard. They were the only human beings alive. The silence left by the absence of civilization must have been overwhelming. Only the vast, raw expanse of a renewed earth stretched before them. Noah's first action after leaving the ark reveals the true nature of his character. He was a practical man, a builder, a survivor. Logic would suggest that his first priority should have been to build a shelter, plant crops, or secure food and safety. Instead, Scripture tells us, then Noah built an altar to the Lord. Genesis 8:20. God established a covenant not only with Noah, but with the earth itself and every living creature. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. Genesis 8:22. God established the regular order of the natural world. He promised the stability necessary for life to flourish again. To seal that promise, he chose an atmospheric sign that may never have appeared before in the pre-flood world of mist and vapor: the rainbow. Sunlight refracted through countless droplets of water, beauty emerging from the storm. The rainbow became God's visible signature, a reminder that while his justice can be severe, his mercy endures. Its bow points upward, like a warrior's bow hung upon the wall after battle, signifying peace between heaven and earth. The ark now rested quietly upon the mountains of Ararat. Its mission was complete. That colossal structure, the product of human labor and divine design, became one of the greatest monuments of faith in ancient history. The story of Noah teaches a profound truth. Salvation requires a response. God could have saved Noah with a single command. He could have lifted him above the flood. Instead, he chose partnership. God gave the blueprint. Noah supplied the labor. God sent the wind. Noah drove the pegs. God shut the door. Noah sealed every joint with pitch. The story of the ark is not merely about a flood or about animals. It is about the architecture of obedience. It is about building a life of faith while the sky is still blue and no one believes the rain is coming. It is about continuing to cut timber, heat pitch, and work faithfully day after day, not because of what can be seen, but because of trust in the one who gave the command.